Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Today, we are honored to have Pedro Silva. Pedro Silva is the Director of Engagement with YOUnify. Pedro, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good, man. All things considered.
All things considered. And well, yeah, we are in a stressful situation in this country right now, but you know what? It's activists, it's people that are engaging that actually makes a difference. First of all, tell us a little bit about what YOUnify does.
So YOUnify is in a space that we lovingly call bridging, which is basically bringing people together across differences. And we kind of have the mission of minimizing toxic polarization, as well as bridging cultural divides of every kind, but with the aim of solving the problems that are very solvable in our country. And we kind of come from the mindset that we have everything we need to flourish, to thrive, and to create systems that positively impact our communities. It's just getting past some of those hurdles. And some of those hurdles are polarization, misunderstanding of different cultural norms, and things like that. So we create containers, whether it's through using conversation trainings and such, or JODI, which stands for Justice, Opportunity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, hosting films, all sorts of different interventions that bring people together to look at the values that inspire and motivate people, and then try to help create situations where they can look at how can we solve problems that a lot of times are across differences, like people are experiencing similar problems, and then they just have challenges in terms of creating solutions because they're too busy focusing on the divides or the things that seem to divide them.
It's hard not to think about the divide, right? When there are people in the positions of power who selectively are trying to do that. I have some reasons why I think they do, but let's use an example as critical race theory, which supposedly
Mm.
isn't taught in high school or in these other places, but somehow that's become a new meme that really keeps people apart because folks don't want this critical race theory taught. How do you get around the people in power attempting to put that on to the community, if you will, while you are at the same time trying to tell these folks you need to try to get along? I mean, it's almost you're fighting the powers, the people with power that's pushing these particular memes.
Well, we kind of come from the position that the individual who is kind of building the community actually has more power than they think that they have to affect positive change through organizing and collective action. And the challenge is of helping people realize that they have the power that they don't think they have. Usually people in a lot of systems, they look to someone and they say, okay, that is the person that has the power. And so I, being a powerless person, have to align myself with power to keep myself safe or to provide for my family or whatever the thing is that most human beings have in common. And we try to show people you actually have more power than you think you do. And from a place of power, you can actually build relationships. Because people, the reason why I think a lot of people don't build the relationships across perceived differences is because of fear, and fear of not having power, fear of being left behind, fear of not being able to take care of their family. And so they look to some leader that tells them, I see your problems, I see your challenges, and I can save you. And then they say, okay, I'm going to trust that you can do that because I feel powerless to do it myself. But if you actually can connect with other people who have similar values, they want to provide for their children, they want to be able to pay their bills, they want to be able to imagine having a future, and you put them with other people and go, oh, what? We have similar values? Hold on. We are both the strings are being pulled by people who seem to have power, or we believe them to have power, but there's more power in our interrelating and co-creating than there is in this system that's struggling to try to maintain a semblance of power. That's kind of our approach. And so we try to help people recognize the power that's already inherent in them, and then expand on that through organizing collective action and working together across differences to learn to see multiple perspectives on the same problem and being able to do something together to solve these challenges that most people agree on. A lot of the issues you see is like 70% of people agree, and yet we see this polarization. Is like, how is that possible? It's because people feel powerless, and that's where we kind of engage at that level.
Now that is commendable, the work that you're doing. My biggest question with these types of organizations is, how do you scale? I can see these organizations working well in a suburban area. I can see them working well in places where people have the time to have thought processes and going to meetings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What happens in these areas where people are living on top of each other and just trying to make it through the day? What kind of procedural fixes is there for that sort of environment?
I mean, I think that's probably a valid criticism of any kind of work that's in this spaces, because a lot of people don't have the time or the resources, at least at this present time, to be able to, like you said, attend meetings and things like that. But there are ways, and just like if you grew up poor, like I grew up poor, there are natural, like inherent ways that people organize to be able to survive in those conditions. And I think that what we see in those environments where people have rent parties and do things like run car washes or sell dinners to help people pay for their food, or I mean, pay for their rent and things like that, is that there's already an inherent wisdom in community to be able to work together to solve problems. But what we've done is we've forgotten that we do have power. And so we don't lean into our neighbors. We have bought into the illusion that we can do things all on our own. And so as we've started to buy into that, we end up being victim to the propaganda that's out there that tells them that we're powerless. And so I think that fundamentally, it's reminding people of the wisdom of community that has already existed within us for generations, and being able to maximize that wisdom. So even in a poor environment, say they wanted to build a garden in their community, and we've seen people do it, where a person will say, hey, you know what? We need some fresh food in this community, and it's a food desert out here. But some people decide, hey, we're going to get together, we're going to collectivize, we're going to make this little garden. And then you see a little bit of a success. And then you start to realize that you can do these things among yourself. Then it changes the way you approach power. Even take, for example, I was a pastor for 10 years, right?
Right.
So there's certain situations where a person says like, oh, I feel powerless. Like we do a thing called power mapping, and it shows people that they actually have more connections and more relationships than they think they have, and that those things can be leveraged. So say someone wants something to happen in their community, but they say, well, who am I? By myself. Well, maybe by yourself you don't feel like you're anyone. But then you say, well, do you belong to a church? Yeah, I belong to a church. Okay, how many people in your church have had that same concern or that same issue? And then you connect with those people and say, okay, how many people in faith communities in general is your church connected to another one? Yes. How many people in faith communities are having the same issue? Okay, let's discuss. It's that individualism that ends up making people diminish themselves instead of maximizing themselves collectively. And so we help people to see that. Then they can come to their same senator who won't listen to one person and say, hey, I represent 300 people who all see this. And then it changes the dynamic. But it's getting people to remember that they can lean on each other and build relationships. Like we're working with a group in Ohio right now. They're mostly retired people who have decided that they want to see there's a lot of things happening in Ohio right now. And
Oh
they're
yeah.
like, we want to see some changes happening. And they've decided, yeah, I might be retired and I might be a little older, but it's still an opportunity for me to affect positive change, because they've gone to some of the trainings and said, okay, well, if we try to do this, do you think it's possible? Yes, we do think it's possible. We just have to collectivize and lean in to making those kinds of positive changes. And we've seen people making those shifts, and that can be duplicable, because that's how societies have survived from the beginning of time. We just forgotten about it because we bought into, I can do everything by myself, which keeps people divided.
It's amazing that you are actually saying to break down our polarization to be able to enhance our power. The one thing that this country preaches, which is in fact individualism, is actually its biggest weakness. I
Absolutely.
mean, you're essentially saying that, and you take a look at when we go into the guns issue, you take a look at 80% of Americans want most of the good things about restricting guns. 80% of Americans plus, and
Absolutely.
we can't get it through. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, one of the words that individual word, I break it down sometimes into in, divide, you all. And
Mhm.
so it's like you take an individual and they're operating from a place of division, right? And so you get a person, imagine we've watched the movies, Rambo or whatever kind of movie where one person goes in and somehow they're saving 50, 60, 300 people by themselves. That belief that that one person can be able to protect everyone, to save everyone. And it's a fantasy, right? But we have it in the culture of the American consciousness. So imagine a person, their value is I want my family to be safe. I want my family to be protected. Everybody agrees on that, you know? And I want to be able to, take care of my children. I want these things for my family. It comes down to that, right? And then they say, but if it's threatened, what can I do? Well, by myself, I can't do anything. I'm scared. But if I have this weapon, and each bullet, just imagine this, right? Each bullet represents from the consciousness of that person is like a multiplier, it's a force multiplier. And so they imagine themselves to have a multiplication of themselves through their weapons and their bullets and things like that. And it all comes down to a value of trying to protect and take care of their family. And they don't want anybody to harm their family, which is honorable value. But then that same individualism thinks I have to do it by myself. If you have a community that's working together to encourage one another, to support one another, to see kids that are struggling and that everybody sees it as their problem and that something that they can work together to solve, then the environment itself becomes safer. And you don't even need the fear of the threat that you're going to protect yourself from is diminished by community and by working together with people to solve problems. And that's the thing that I think with the guns you see is people think that they have to save everything and do everything by themselves. And they see guns as a force multiplier that builds their capacity to be able to do that thing. But in reality, I don't think it is that way.
Interestingly, right? We're talking. We just use guns as an example right there. But if we go ahead and migrate to the subway in New York, where Jordan Neely was murdered by Penny, Daniel Penny, because he came in with mental issues, shouting that he wanted some food and he didn't care if he lived, he touched nobody, and this guy just choked him to death. And I want to break this into two pieces because there are two pieces here. The seeing a black body automatically as a weapon or as a danger, number one, even if that person is mentally ill. But number two, how you actually saw a particular sect try to defend Neely, try to make it that he just did what he needed to do or what he thought he needed to do. And they don't see that, they're unable to see that what you're saying is being in a black body gives others the right not to kill you, but to believe they are justified in killing you.
Well, I mean, I would say that this is a criticism to some degree of the education system, but I'll say the education system works in the sense that we have different narratives that we perpetuate in our system. Generally speaking, they all come down to again to the same value. I want to be safe. I want to be protected. I don't want my family to lose out. I want to be able to provide for my family. And anything that seems like it's a threat to that, then I have to keep it away from me. I have to distance myself from it. and but it also emerges from a unconscious, often, sense of powerlessness. Like that, they actually feel powerless, but then it manifests as force, which is force and power are two different dynamics,
Right.
but we conflate force with power in our society. And so a person feels that their ability to force a situation is the same thing as power, which in fact is not. And even with the situation with Black bodies, like yes, it's been weaponized. Like I've had people tell me, who people get to know me, I'm short. I'm like very short. I'm like 5'4". And I've had people say to me, I don't know why, but in my mind, you're 6 feet tall. Like, generally speaking,
Right.
like a Black person probably still sees me at 5'4". but I've had white people tell me, for some reason in my mind, every time I see you, I'm surprised that you're as short as you are, even though they've seen me. But in their mind, they experience me as bigger and stronger and more physically, have more physical power than I might actually have. That's a psychological thing that's been conditioned into the consciousness of our many people in our society. And so, but it still keeps coming down to that same thing. It's like that person just is a terrified person. Like Penny, in my imagination, because obviously I'm not him, but I perceived that he was scared. And then he acted out of his fear and it's triggered a response. And then he tried to, in his mind, neutralize the threat, even though there may not have been an actual threat happening. But I've seen it time and time again that people will perceive a threat because they already are carrying that fear within them. So I've used this example for folks plenty of times. Say that you have a water hose in your garage, but you forgot to hang it up. You just throw it on the ground. You forget you throw it on the ground. You have a fear of snakes. You walk into the garage and you think, oh my God, it's a snake. You start chopping up the water
Oh,
hose immediately. And then you realize, like, oh my God, it's a water hose. It wasn't a snake, right? You have both simultaneously had the experience of coming in face to face with one of your fears, taking action on it, and it was very real until it wasn't, you know. And that's what happens, I think, a lot of times in encounters with folks, people encountering Black bodies, is it's been programmed into our society that we are a threat. And so people have that in their mind already, still running that tape of how do I protect myself, how do I keep my family safe, how do, not realizing that we have the same concerns, we have the same values, we have the same things that, excuse me, that we're thinking about every single day. And that when another person puts their fear over someone else's reality, that's a dangerous cocktail, you know, and that's what we're perceiving a lot of times. And so, someone like Penny, in the mind of another person who's terrified, they'll say, he saved us, he was a hero. And without going too far into it, we have a very, I would say, a unhealthy, uh, I can't think of a good word, relationship with the hero dynamic.
yeah.
Like we want someone to be our hero, like so badly that, and when we decide someone's our hero, we have a strong commitment in society to that hero, even when we're witnessing the failings, because we just want someone to make us safe, you know. And it's going to be a while before humans, I think, get to a place where we start to really realize that a lot of the fears that we're running and operating are not actual reality, you know, because we've been running that tape for so long that it's pretty ubiquitous at this point. But I do think that interventions that cause people to have come an encounter with cognitive dissonance and being able to say, like, hold on, and feeling the discomfort of the thoughts that they are holding and their experience, and then encountering those, I think we're eventually going to be able to, I hope that we'll be able to, because I've seen people do it, to be able to come in contact with that awareness and go, like, I'm holding conflicting thoughts. I say I have this value, but I act in this way. And I do believe that there's going to be an increased value in congruency in humanity over time. Hopefully, it won't take a lot of hardship and despair and more of what we've been seeing to get to that point where we value congruency. I hope it doesn't, but I do believe that eventually congruency will win.
Now, one of the reasons I started doing this work and this type of journalism, this type of projects, is because I think we are purposefully being taught not to think critically. We are purposefully being taught all of these things to make people believe they're powerless. So I agree with you wholeheartedly there, because again, when we take a look at the dynamics in this country, and if you look at who are the people that really should justifiably be scared of others, the least person one would think that the person that should be most feared in this country are not the black men or whatever. After all, weren't these people allowed them? Well, I won't say allowed themselves, but weren't these people enslaved? Weren't these people allowed to have to suffer under Jim Crow? Weren't these people pretty much, for lack of a better term, mentally neutered? Who needs to fear who? And how do you, and look, there are genuinely folks that are scared of people who, let's say, look like me, genuinely. But it's because of what they were taught. But again, if being taught is not enough, right? And my question to you is as follows. It's what you're taught. Critical and how you're taught to think on your own. Critical thinking should have every American citizen not fearful of, let's say, we're talking black right now, let's say, not of black folks specifically, because again, the fear seemed to have been justifiably on the other, or should be justifiably on the other side. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think that there's always been resistance of Black people in the in the context of subjugation, like when Black people were subjugated in the way that we were during slavery in this country. I do think there was always resistance and things like that, but people, because of those same values, I want to keep my family safe, I want to do these things, we held back some aspect of our own volition simply because we didn't want our children to be harmed or something like that. So I think that always is in place. So I don't think that we were necessarily neutered, but we were just being, because I know you used that term, but I think that it was more we were being strategic because we want our children to survive. I actually wrote a small little piece called "Do Children Owe Their Parents?" And the idea in it was talking about it was called "Do Children Owe Their Parents? A Black Perspective," and it was the idea that in our context, in an American context, a lot of times the fear Black people were afraid for their children to be harmed by the white community, largely speaking, because they could touch our bodies or do whatever they wanted to do, and we seemingly couldn't say much. And so that informed a lot of the ways that we show up in the world. It informs the ways that our parents parented us sometimes, because sometimes our parents would want to make us more afraid of them than we would be of the police or of white people to keep us safe. So they would be like, I want you to be scared of me so when I tell you don't go down that neighborhood or don't go down that street, you won't, because you'll be afraid of what I'll do. And sometimes I might need to make you more scared than of me than you are of the other authorities, if you will. But then the downside of that is that as we started to gain different freedoms and things like that, some of us started being like, our forms of resistance were, going against the system in any way we possibly can, because we watched our parents, their backs being broken under the system, watching our parents being, like in my case, my mom was like super intelligent woman. And I feel like my mom got basically bashed by this context in America and was not able to fully realize her potential, and kind of gave up over time because she was constantly being bashed and beat down. And so some of us, we look at that system and we say, okay, if this is what's going to happen, I'm not going to participate, or
Why
I'm going to do
bother?
whatever I can. Yeah, why bother? What? How can I get around it? And I do think that all of those expressions still come down to fear, a sense of powerlessness, and those sorts of things. I do, and but I also think
Let me
that
interrupt
because
you
of
a second,
yeah,
then, Pedro, because when I just said why bother, I mean, I this was just sort of a I just got this out of what you were saying, and it was like, wow, people ask different demographics, different groups, why is it that you stay in that condition? Why don't you take yourself out of the condition? And the way you express that, why bother? If
hmm
there's a likelihood I'll be unsuccessful in getting there, why bother? That just kind of rang out. Sorry to interrupt you. That just
yeah, no.
rang out there.
I mean, I think a lot of people. I mean, for me, it still all comes down to fear, and no matter what it is, and people do come to that conclusion of why bother. And I do think that there's a fear. Like a lot of people I knew growing up, they were afraid of white people. Sometimes they would say that they were afraid out loud. Sometimes they would exaggerate the notion that they weren't afraid, and because they don't, who wants to say I'm afraid, who wants to walk around and be like I'm scared,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? And so, but it's the same issue that you see on either side, and it's the same values, it's the same things that they want to experience, and then that notion that it could be taken from them, or that they can try and fail, or it doesn't matter, like you build up your community and then someone burns it down, like all of these things, great on the consciousness of a person, and a community. But at the same time, I still personally submit to the notion that if it's emerging from a place of fear, then its illusion of power is impotent, And so I try my best in my own walk to be able to say, where is this coming from? And I've had encounters with people who have been fearful, but if I can get myself to maintain a sense of awareness where I'm like, I see what's happening right now, and I see that this person is operating out of fear. Like I was at a thing out here when it was a few years ago. I can't remember to recall the man, but it happened in Texas, where I believe it happened in Texas, where it was a black man that was killing police officers,
Oh yeah.
because yeah. And so we had a vigil. Yeah, so we had a vigil both for the police officers and for the unarmed black people who had been killed. So some students held it. I wasn't responsible for
Right.
it, but I decided to show up to it. And a white man showed up, and whenever we read off a name of a black person, he would say something like thug, this, that, and
Oh,
the other thing. And it was a candlelight vigil, and we were just saying names, and trying to hold like a neutral space. These college students were doing it, and he would say thug and criminal, and he would just throw out these words, and then everybody would kind of look like, why is this guy doing this? So then I said to him, I said, sir, can you please stop? And he was like, no, basically, I'm gonna keep doing this. And I said to him, I said, sir, look, I know that you're afraid, and that's why you're doing this, but you don't need to be afraid. And then he said, I'm not afraid. What are you going to say? I'm afraid. These are thugs. And he kept saying his things. And I said, this event is both for police officers and for unarmed black people, because the same system is harming everyone. The
both
same
of them.
system is
Absolutely.
making everyone afraid of one another, and it's creating this. So, and I tried to explain to him, still, he said what he had to say. And then I said again, sir, I know you're afraid. And then at some point he said, why do you keep saying I'm afraid? And then I said, because I've been afraid before too, and my face looked just like yours. And then as soon as I said it, he stopped. He didn't say anything else for the rest of the night. He got quiet. And then he sat down and talked to the students and started asking them questions, and they started talking to him back. Um,
Wow.
but the fear and the mutuality had to be acknowledged. And by, grace, I was able to hold my peace and be able to say to him, like, I know what fear looks like. I've been afraid. You are afraid. Stop doing what you're doing out of fear. and he stopped. I don't know what happened with the rest of his life, but he stopped that night and he was able to be quiet. And I think that a lot of people are operating under that fear, and they're like almost like a soda that's been shaken up, contents under pressure, and you open up a little bit and they like, but it's temporary though. Like even when you shake up a
Right.
soda, flows for a little bit and then it settles down and it has less fizz, less potency and
Afterwards, yeah.
everything afterwards. But it's like we just don't have those containers that allow some of that stuff to spill over and to settle for people to then reflect, you know? And so we try to create those containers and help people witness what's occurring inside of them when they have these encounters so that they own it. Because if I just tell them, you know, all the time, and these are all the tips and stuff like that, it's not going to be sustainable. But if they can get to a point where they recognize it within themselves, then they can say like, oh, this is what's happening in me. And now I realize, now that I know that it's happening, just like in 12 steps, you know, you realize you're powerless, and then you can invite in something that offers you some semblance of true power. Not exactly the same, but there's that you have to admit where you're coming from, that you feel powerless before you can actually do that. And I think that's the humility that a lot of us need to cultivate.
You nailed that. And you know what? Believe it or not, we're having so much time talking. We went a bit over time, but here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to close this session out. I think we got just where I'd hope with with sort of resolution. What I want to do the next time is to cover a few more directions. In other words, how can we everything that you've spoken about, how can we actually make a difference starting now?
Mm.
That's the goal that I'd like to, because I think many a times not that you are talking in platitudes, not that I'm talking in platitudes, but many times we have all these grandiose ideas. And my question is, what's next? What do we do next? So the next time we talk, I want us to go ahead and talk about what are we going to do next? Because polarization is a real thing now, and it's being directed from above. How can we solve it from below?
Well, I'll say there's no below. We're not below. We're like
Oh,
realizing that we're not below.
I am glad that you corrected me. That what I meant is I should say really from the masses, from the grassroots.
Mhm.
That's what I should say. Anyway, give me a quick 15-second closer.
I believe, and I invite others to consider, that we are very much more powerful than we imagine ourselves to be, and that the power that we see in others is just a misguided reflection. That if we look within, we'll recognize that the things that we want from everyone else to provide for us to give us, we can do it ourselves, not as individuals, but as a collective, as a community, brother to brother, sister to sister, friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor. It's through that that we create the world that we know is possible.
Pedro Silva, Director of Engagement at YOUnify. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right, and we will be back.
Thank you.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.